Welcome, I'm Darren, and I'll be your guide today as I look at the 1971 through 1973 Topps basketball card sets. And these cards mark the beginning of standard basketball cards. It's not a continuous path from 1969 all the way through to today. There was a break where Topps stepped away and then Fleer picked up after a few years. But the 1969 and 1970 sets were a little bit different. They were really part of a different era of cards because Topps hadn't quite settled into making standard cards year after year. There had been efforts, kind of stop-start efforts with Bowman, Topps, and Fleer prior to 1969. And then in 1969, when Topps really put their emphasis into making standard basketball cards, they used the tall boy for the first two sets in order to make the cards stand out and really start to build a market that didn't exist up until that point. And the fact that they used the tall boys for a second year is probably indicative of how difficult it was to really get standardization of card collecting for basketball to work, because when they did it in hockey and they did it in football, they were both one-offs. They were both done as gimmicks. But in basketball, they did it for 2 years. They kept the gimmick going. So the fact that it stuck around meant that they really did have to put a lot of energy. And for starting off in 1971 with standardized cards, they continued to make an effort to make these cards bold. And so the cards aren't all that different, ironically, from the 1970 set. So for the 1970/71 basketball set, they are obviously tall boys, but the cards are completely covered in a bold color behind the player. So the cards are going to stand out anywhere that you find them. In 1971, they did something similar where even though the card size was smaller, so it was a standardized card, they still have a full square in the middle of the card that has a bold color behind the portrait, meaning that this is a card that once again stands out. If it was 1991, not 1971, the card would stand out in a card shop display case, which in 1991 these cards certainly did. And then up at the top of the card, they have a 1969 font for the city for the team. And this is also done in very bold colors. So this is a card that uses a lot of strong, bold colors to distinguish itself in a card market where basketball card collecting still wasn't a very strong presence. They were still trying to earn their stripes. The card was still doing a very good job, even though now it was a standardized card set, but at least now basketball cards were being treated as a standard card. And the league leader cards are also very bold. This is a red color for virtually the entire card. They just have a little white band around the outside. And then in a very 1960s baseball kind of approach, they have 3 holes where they have portraits for the 3 players who are league leaders. So again, the card is what's bold. The players in this case are not that bold, which is quite a departure from what we'd seen in the 1970 set. Here, in this case, the card is the thing that's most strong, but you might notice that it says NBA leaders on it, which is not that distinct, except in the case of this 1971 set, it is. Because what the 1971-72 Topps basketball card set is most significant for is the fact that it's not just NBA players. Now the ABA players show up in it as well. For the actual player cards, there's no difference between the two. But for the league leaders, now they specify it because they also have league leaders for the ABA players. So both of the leagues are showing up. Not in equal representation. Most of the set was still NBA, and then the ABA is tacked on at the end. But in between the two is this island where we have the NBA league leaders, but they also have another subset which is for the NBA championship, or finals as we know it today. And the finals cards are game by game, so every single game has its own distinct card, obviously a portrait on the front, and then a little something about what's special about the game. And then on the back, you get the statistics for that particular game. And then they close it out with a championship card celebrating the winner of the series. And in this case, because it's horizontal, now you can actually see the theme that went into the design of this card, which is, it's designed to be like a TV. Here it actually makes sense. In the other cards, it didn't make as much sense. But that was the other subset. And like I said, that was stuffed in the middle, or toward the back, but still in the middle between the NBA players and the ABA players. And that was the set. There wasn't very much to it. In fact, they didn't even do all-star cards. And that's kind of disappointing because in the 1970-71 set, the second Tallboy set, we had player cards, and then anybody who was an all-star got an additional all-star card. Well, for 71-72, they didn't do all-star cards. They did, however, continue to do inserts. And the insert for 71-72 is stickers, but it's stickers for players. So each one of the cards is a horizontal card with 3 stickers that are like little panels, kind of like what we would see a decade later in the main set. In this case, it's 3 vertical stickers for players. NBA players as well as ABA players show up on these. And so if you peel off one sticker, you just have an incomplete card which only has 2 stickers in the space. That's the way it's laid out. And then they also did stickers where they have all of the logos. Again, NBA as well as ABA teams are done this way, and these stickers are much smaller, so you can oftentimes run into one of these cards where there's 1 or 2 of these stickers that are missing, because for the team logos, it's a lot more common for them to be peeled off than for the player stickers. But that's the 1971-72 top set. So you can see that now, as they were starting to standardize the cards, they were also still trying to keep them bold and earn their audience. So by 1972-73, well, they kept doing the same thing. Here the card is done very similar, except they have more real estate dedicated to the bright color, and the team name is now even stronger down at the bottom. And because it's NBA and ABA, you got to feel sorry for the designer who's got to stuff conquistadores on the card. But at any rate, the cards are done this way, so bold continues to be the order of the day. And something you might notice about the ABA cards is the fact that on these cards, they specify, for the statistics, they specify NBA statistics and they specify ABA statistics. And this is really significant because in cases like, well, with Rick Barry, he started off as an NBA player, so he had NBA statistics. Then he went to the ABA. Then he went back to the NBA. So keeping track of which league the statistics show up is actually valuable because it helps you to understand the general competition that they had going on, because Rick Barry was the star of the ABA early on. So the statistics look a lot more impressive where he's there, but that is one of the quirks of these card sets in the 1970s, is the fact that the NBA and ABA statistics actually come into play because the 2 leagues were going on at the same time, and you had some players who went from one league to another. And like the 1970 set, we once again had all-star cards. So any player who was an all-star, he has a regular card, and then he also has an all-star card. So he has both cards in the set for collectors to collect. And the all-star cards are done in basically the same theme, except instead of a team name, now they have space to mention that he was a member of the all-star team. And on the card back, they have the statistics for the all-star games, which it's actually kind of interesting because if you look at the statistics, you'll notice something. They have scoring average, which is stupid because, look, it's one game. Every year you play in one all-star game. So the scoring average for one game is the number of points you scored. So it's a redundant statistic until you get all the way down to the bottom. And at the bottom, at the total, that's where you finally have use for the scoring average. I think it's a really funny quirk on this card. I love seeing it, but this is the way they did their all-star cards. But there is something to note, which is that the all-star cards for the NBA All-Stars and for the ABA All-Stars are a little bit different. The NBA All-Stars all have a blue theme to them. The ABA cards all have a red theme to them. So that is the distinction between the 2 leagues. And as we're going to see, that's pretty consistent. Because while you've got the All-Star cards, you also have the championship cards for, once again, like in the previous year. The championship cards, now you have an NBA championship and you have an ABA championship. And for each one of these, the cards once again have a blue theme for the NBA and they have a red theme for the ABA. Now, does this carry across to the league leaders? Well, as a matter of fact, it does. So in the case of the league leaders, you have the blue and you have the red, as is normal. In the case of these cards, though, it's a horizontal orientation, and once again, we're getting back to where you have portraits, which are more in line of what we'd seen in 1970, where it's more about the player as opposed to a card itself being the dominant feature. But yes, all of the NBA players, the NBA player cards and the ABA player cards are done just in general. But for all of the All-Stars and the championship cards and for the league leaders, all of the NBA players are in blue and all the ABA players are in red. And that's the way that they designed the 1972-73 set. So when they got around to 1973, now it was time to really ease back and to turn these cards into just standard cards, which is good because it's wonderful to have the whole background behind the player. And here in 73, that's exactly what they did. So these cards finally have just a normal shot of the player. So it's not just like all-star cards or championship cards where we get to see the player in action. Here we get to see a full glorious shot of the player either in action or posed or however it works. And the cards are now becoming more benign and it's more in line with what they were doing in baseball and in football. So cards were now being treated as just another sport. Whether Topps got tired of trying to show off the cards or whether this was now the natural place for them, they were now getting their audience, I don't know. But now cards were going to be just another set. For the most part, they would get kind of gimmicky in a couple of years, but here they're not trying to do anything special. But there is one thing that is very distinct about this card set from the previous ones we saw, which is that they still had all-star cards, but that's the way the player card comes. So in previous years, if a player was an all-star, he had a regular card and he had a separate all-star card, as you can see in 1972. But in 1973, now, if a player was an all-star, that's just the way his player card comes. Stats on the back are regular stats. It's just the way that the Walt Frazier card comes. It's just the way that the Dr. J card comes. That's the way it comes. So this is the one player card for each one of the players. And you might notice something interesting about this, which is that, interestingly, here with these all-star cards, the NBA card is the red card and the ABA card is the blue card. So that theme shift happened for these all-star cards in 1973. But I'd love to say that that's the way that the set was, but it's not the way that the set was, because when you move over to the playoff cards, which are now playoff cards, not championship cards, now it's the other way around. The NBA is once again in blue and the ABA is once again in red. That's the design theme for the rest of the set. And the playoff cards are now done as playoff cards. So there's a different card for each one of the series of the playoffs. The stats on the back are for the whole series, so you know how the series progressed. And then the championship card, likewise, is a card for the championship. It's not a whole series for it, it's just a standalone for the championship. And likewise, the league leader cards are also done blue for the NBA and red for the ABA. These cards are once again horizontal like in the previous year, but they, like in the previous year, are using the general design theme as you would expect. So in this case, everything is just text down at the bottom. They're not playing any tricks, but you still get the players all lined up, all three of them on the card front. And so because of this, you can see that with the playoff cards and with the championship cards, obviously, and with the league leaders, all of the NBA cards are still blue and all the ABA cards are still red, except for the All-Star cards, which are just themed in reverse for whatever reason, who knows why, but that's the way that they did the 1973-74 set. Now, fortunately, they once again did inserts, and the inserts for 1973 are actually stickers once again. But the stickers are done more like Fleer. So in this case, it's a team logo and then a team banner, not the same two teams. Every single card has a distinct pattern between the two. So you don't have mixing and matching of teams at the top and the bottom. It's all reliable. But if you're a collector of a team, then there are two cards for you to get, because one card has your team as the logo and a whole separate card has your team as the banner down below. So it's another thing to collect, which again is very much like what Fleer was doing. But in the case of Topps, these just happen to be Topps, not Fleer, which makes perfect sense. But that's the way that the first three card sets for the standard cards of basketball worked. They weren't trying to do anything gimmicky. They were just making basic cards, although bold cards, but they were starting to get into the groove of just collectors where this was the basketball card set for them to collect every year. And also, again, with the standard cards here, we had ABA as a part of the card set. So we would always have ABA players, or after the leagues merged, we would have the two leagues together. Obviously, this was the beginning of basketball as we know it really collecting together. So I'm going to cut it off here, and then I'm going to look at the 1974 set and on in separate videos. So definitely check out for that. If you haven't seen the early basketball card video I did for what led up to this, I do urge you to do so. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please do that as well. And thank you very much for watching.